Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thank you so much for coming today. Would you mind introducing yourself in your own words for my listeners?
My name is Holly Madison. I have a podcast called Girls Next Level, and I have a new show called Lethally Blonde coming out on Monday the 25th on ID.
Yes, you do. Okay, so we briefly just chatted, but you grew up, or you were born in Oregon, grew up there partially, and then moved to Alaska. How did growing up in those places shape you?
I feel like Alaska was a really great place for me to just like be isolated and like be at one with nature, because I lived on Prince of Wales Island, which is very isolated. It's like if you watch those Alaska survival shows, a lot of them take place on Prince of Wales Island. So it was kind of like a magical childhood. But I moved to Oregon again when I was 10 years old, and I didn't adjust to that very well. I hated being in Oregon, and we would vacation in Southern California, and I just dreamed of moving to LA.
Since you were like a young girl, because you went to college there, correct?
Yeah, I transferred colleges, and I went to Loyola Marymount in LA.
So, okay, the Playboy Mansion to me feels like light years away from Alaska, even like Oregon. When did you first discover Playboy, or when were you first exposed to it?
I always knew what it was since I was a little kid, just because like my dad had a subscription. I thought it was kind of funny. Like I remember my sister and I found the magazines under his bed, and we just thought it was so funny that there was like a naked butt in a magazine. But as I got older, like in high school, I would see all these women, you just be in like a store back when they used to sell like DVDs and like random stores in the mall. And the women on the cover of like the Playboy DVDs were just so stunning. And I just wanted to look like that for some reason. It's funny because it wasn't even the look that was like cool when I was in high school, because everybody's like, oh, you must have like wanted to impress boys wanting to look like that. But like my boyfriend in high school like loved tattoo girls. Like he would have bought the tattoo magazine, and it just wasn't like that blonde look. Like it wasn't what was cool when I was in high school in Oregon, So I was really attracted to it for some reason. And I was like, I want to look like that. I want to be like that.
Have you ever tried to figure out maybe what that reason was? Like, was it, I don't know, I can imagine that, moving to LA or going into Playboy or moving into the mansion from such an isolated place or isolating childhood, almost as like an escape.
Yeah, well, I think for me, like I was on the spectrum but undiagnosed and didn't really understand, why I was as introverted as I was, why I had such a hard time connecting with people naturally. And I feel like when I was younger, I didn't know this at the time at all. It was kind of like a subconscious thing. But looking back, I can see that I felt like if I could be famous, that's like a shortcut to feeling connection with people. You know what I mean?
Accepted.
Yeah, it's not. But spoiler alert.
Yeah. I'm curious what your family and parents thought of the decision.
To move to LA or to be in Playboy?
Be in Playboy.
They didn't know what was going on, really. I remember when I moved into the mansion, I got a new car, so I didn't have to drive like the wrecked car that I was driving in college anymore. And my dad flew down because he's going to drive the car back up and like give it to a friend. And I kind of gave him a tour around the property, and he goes, oh, so does Hef really live here? So they didn't know anything that was going on, and I didn't want to talk about it with them. And I think they were just thinking, as long as she's somewhere where she's like safe and doing good and has career opportunities, it's okay. I think that's what a lot of people's parents thought, of the girlfriends who lived at the house.
I was going to say, so you didn't feel like they didn't judge you, or you didn't feel shamed at all?
I mean, I felt ashamed of the situation because it was like I thought I knew what I was getting into it, but it was a lot more than that, a lot deeper than that. I was definitely in over my head, and I wasn't proud of the relationship, not necessarily with him, but just like with the other girls and like all the multiple partner thing. I wasn't into it all. So I definitely had a lot of shame about it, but it wasn't like coming from my parents being judgmental or anything. Yeah.
Well, that's nice at least.
Yeah.
That you're not, didn't have that added pressure.
Yeah, for sure.
Things seemed very chaotic, as I'm sure we'll get into. What first attracted you to the mansion? Because I know you had talked about, I don't know if it was in your first book, but like you were in debt and like facing potential homelessness when you were like only 21 years old. Did it feel like Hef was kind of this fairy godmother in a sense and could like save you from your circumstances?
Totally. I mean, I was attracted to go to the mansion parties at first because, I mean, one, I'd always wanted to be in Playboy, but two, I was working at the Hooters in Santa Monica when I was in college. And the Playboy parties back then were just like the coolest parties, and they were really hard to get into, and all the girls wanted to go, and maybe there was like one or two of the girls that worked there that like got to go. And I was also working for Hawaiian Tropic, and at one of the events, Hef's doctor attended it, and he told the producer of it, I want to invite all these girls and put them on the list for the next party. So I was so excited to go. And then I started getting invited to their pool parties every Sunday, which is like a smaller, more intimate crowd. And it just felt like such an amazing place to go to and like use the pool and the tanning beds. And, you know, there was a masseuse there, and all the people there were so nice. And like, even though I was just like some nobody, like everybody remembered your name, and it just felt so welcoming. And it felt like a community, where LA is a city where it's really hard to find a community when you first move there. It's kind of, it can be a very lonely city. And even in college or like working at the restaurant I worked at, like I made friends, but people, it was very transient. People were in and out. It would be a lot of women who moved to LA to try and make it in the business. But after like 6 months to a year, they're like, okay, I'm going back home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there like a social hierarchy, even of you're talking about like, oh, maybe one or two girls got invited. So it's kind of like that validation of like, oh, they chose me, which would be very exciting.
Yeah, it was really exciting. All kinds of things like that were exciting. Like even working at Hooters, like they'd pick like 3 of the girls out of the restaurant, and we'd go like shoot for their magazine or their calendar or something. Or one of us got to go be in a pageant, or, you know, it was always like that thing always felt really validating.
Yeah, and like bright lights, big city, and like
totally.
the thing you moved down there probably to chase anyway is like became real.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you said partially you moved to LA because like you were interested in this lifestyle or interested in that life?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be in the entertainment industry in some way, and I thought like being in Playboy would be a good stepping stone to that, which is not necessarily. Like so many women have been in the magazine, and most of them didn't go on to like become famous in one way or another. But when I was a teenager and I was seeing people like Pamela Anderson and Anna Nicole Smith and stuff, it just seems like when all these prominent sex symbols came from Playboy, it kind of seems like, well, that's the path, even though it doesn't happen for most people.
Yeah. In your first book, you stated that girls at the mansion would use different coping methods to kind of get through what you guys were going through. So whether that was like secret relationships, drinking, drugs, what did you personally use?
Oh, I would drink I would always be wasted like every night we went out. You know, I was always good about like not doing drugs, but I wasn't any better off because I would drink so much. It was crazy. So yeah, I would drink a lot every night we went out. I was pretty good about saving my money, but every once in a while I would like splurge on stuff, and that kind of felt like a Band-Aid, you know, when the rest of your life isn't fulfilling. So, I mean, that was kind of it for me. But, you know, a lot of people had their own things. Most everybody else had like a different boyfriend on the side and like a different life. I felt like I was in it a lot more deep and felt a lot more isolated and didn't have any outside friends or anywhere to go within the city. So, you know, I felt like the stakes were a little bit higher for me than it was for some people.
Yeah. And can you talk more about like some of the rules that you guys had while you were living there? Because it seemed like a very controlled environment.
Yeah, we had a 9 o'clock curfew. We would get an allowance for clothes every week, but we weren't allowed to work. Like I kept my waitressing job after I moved in because we were kind of free during the day to do what we wanted as long as we like weren't off with a guy or doing a job that he felt was threatening. But I didn't know when I moved in that you couldn't even have a job like that. When he found out about it, he got upset and I had to quit. So you start to feel like you don't have any options on the outside, really.
Was when you talk about how like he would get upset and these things, was he like an aggressive person or not?
He was like a stomp his feet, kind of throw a fit type of a person. He would fake cry sometimes if he was trying to get his way, and it was really obvious, but like you don't know what to do because here's like this big powerful person that like you respect and who I was very much in love with after a while, and you don't know what to do or how to react to it, but you know it's fake crying, so you're just like sitting there mind blown, like you don't know how to deal with it. But he would throw a lot of fits, and I saw women get kicked out. Like they would leave to go somewhere, go visit their family, but if you find out they were like seeing a guy or something, all their stuff is packed out and like
so he'd kick them out.
Yeah, like put out by the back gate. And there was a lot of that going on within my first couple of months, or he'd like explode on girls who came in like 5 minutes after curfew. So it really created an impression for me. So I was very scared of doing anything wrong.
I mean, it sounds extremely manipulative. Also, the
Yeah.
fake crying.
For sure.
Right? Like
Yeah.
an older man who, in this power dynamic, which we will get to, how do you think the experience of your life in the mansion would be different if, let's say, it happened today where we have social media? Because it sounds like you guys were so cut off from the outside world, and there was this like, dissonance between what was actually going on and then what was showed on like The Girls Next Door.
Yeah,
versus
for sure.
today, like people are more showing how things are happening in real time.
Totally. I think I would have gone through the cycle a lot faster. I think it definitely would have been less isolating because there was no social media to make contacts. Like, you know how it is. You can sit in your room and like connect with certain people on your FYP and feel like you're making friends on TikTok. That you could, like, I've made friends on social media, you know, that I go and hang out with and like real life friends with after, but that wasn't the case back in the day. So when you're isolated, you're isolated. I think if we had social media, we all would have been really, really careful about what we posted because we wouldn't have wanted to like get in trouble or say anything you didn't like. But it would have kind of been like having the reality show the day I stepped in the door, you know, and then you'd start to get a following and other options and your eyes would start to open to what are possibilities.
And so when did the show, walk me back timeline a little bit. So you moved in when you were 21, right?
22 in 2001. Yeah. And then the show came along in 2005. So I'd already been there a good 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. By the time the show came along.
Okay. And so during that time, also you had this dynamic of kind of this trio, which I'm sure like producers at, you know, on television were like, oh yeah, let's film this.
Totally. We had 3 when the show started filming, but before that it was like 7 girlfriends and the cast would change all the time and it was the worst drama. Everybody trying to get each other kicked out. You know, you couldn't trust anybody. It was a lot of stress.
Okay, can you talk a little bit more about that and just the like social dynamics that were going on in the house? Because I can imagine also at such a young age, it's like a formative years, your early 20s, where you're figuring out who you are, what you want in life, how to be a good friend. Yeah, like that early adulthood. So I can't even imagine. It's like living in a sorority on crack.
Yeah, the dynamics were crazy because there would always be other girls who would like want me out of my spot, and if they didn't want the spot themselves, they wanted to replace me with like a friend. They felt like I wasn't asking him for enough money for them. Like, why would I do that? It was so weird. I mean, I could sit here and talk forever about how weird the dynamic was. It all started because Hef had a main girlfriend, like somebody who would be like his main romantic interest and would like share his bedroom and stuff. And that girl was moving out right when I was moving in. And Hef and I were bonding over a lot of things, just like watching old movies. And we like to do a lot of the same things. And I was a homebody and he really liked that. And I became his next main girlfriend. And then the cast kept changing, like new girls kept coming in and out. So it got to a point where I had the most seniority, but I was the youngest. And all these other women had come in with like these great expectations of how much money they could get out of this guy. And they had, for some reason, expected me to like ask him for money for them. And I never even felt like I could advocate for myself, let alone other people. So it just turned into this really toxic dynamic. It sounds even crazy to talk about because they were just so awful. Like I had one other friend there, Bridget, who went on to be on the show, and they were just so awful to us, always trying to get us kicked out and, you know, spreading lies. And one of them accused me of drugging her drink, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's just like crazy.
I can't imagine living with that constant anxiety, constant stress, like just even your cortisol levels during that time.
Totally. I think I was constantly in fight or flight because I thought, you know, I'm not on my feet enough to be good if I get kicked out of here tomorrow. Like I'm trying to save all the money I can, but I'm not there yet. And I'm also trying to like during the day go on auditions, which wasn't really like an approved activity, but I was still trying to find like a bridge out of there. But in the meantime, you're so worried that you have to be careful what you say, even inside the house. You don't know who's listening. You don't know who's trying to get you kicked out.
So there's a lot of paranoia going on.
Yeah, super stressful.
Do you think that that was a tactic of control by Hef? Like that's what I think people use a lot of buzzwords these days. Like they throw around like narcissism, all this stuff. Have you ever thought and tried to psychoanalyze like him and how he turned out that way, or like why he liked these dynamics? It seems to me like a total outsider that like he had a real fear of like genuine intimacy.
I think so. And I think even though you would think he would be the most secure, confident person in the world, he was really insecure when it came to women. And he always wanted to feel like there were multiple women fighting over him. And when I was in the relationship with him, I didn't see it at all. I thought he was amazing. I thought the other girls were just terrible. And some of them were. But as I was there longer and longer, and I started to see that it was really him who was like encouraging the drama and, you know, telling me certain things about other people and, you know,
it's like the classic triangulation.
100%. And that's when I finally left, was when I realized he was doing that, because that made me feel really betrayed.
Did you ever try to put your foot down and say, I'm not comfortable with you having other girlfriends? Like, I don't want to be in this scenario?
Yeah, he knew it all the time. And he was always like, oh, it won't be like this forever. You're the one I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. And I'm just kind of like waiting for it to end, and it just wasn't ending.
Yeah. And then that's when you decided to pack up and leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to get back to like the fame aspect of things. Was there something addicting when it first started? Like, you were living in the house for 4 or 5 years, and then the show started. What was that transition like? Like, all of a sudden people everywhere know you. I mean, that's such a popular, iconic television show of like the early 2000s.
It's interesting because even though I wanted to get in the entertainment industry, I always thought I'd be like an actress or a TV host. I didn't think I would. I mean, reality TV wasn't really much of a thing in 2001. Yeah, so it never occurred to me. And then here I am in this uncomfortable relationship that I have all kinds of mixed feelings about. You know, I'm trying to be as positive as I can and make the relationship as positive as I can, but I have a lot of horrible feelings about it. And the last thing I want to do is like blast this relationship on national television. But it was also one of those things that he decided we were doing. So you do it or you're out of the house tomorrow. So I think all three of us were scared going into it. We didn't know what the show was going to be, if they were going to try to embarrass us or make us look stupid. So we just kind of like held our breaths and went into it. And after about a season and a half of doing it, we started to feel like it was a positive thing, and it was something that could provide us with more opportunities, because I found that we were able to like travel a little bit or take certain jobs if it was for the show. Like if it was for the show, he didn't feel threatened by it. So I'm like, oh my God, this is an amazing opportunity. Now I can do different things, or maybe we could like stay overnight somewhere if it's with the cameras, because we were finally allowed to do that. So we ended up turning the show into a positive. But it's funny because I never felt famous at all. Like I knew how successful the show was. I knew what the ratings were. But all the feedback you would get online back then was like, just if you stumbled across the e-message boards, it was just like all this brutal shit. And I didn't really know, you know, much about online bullying or that it happened to everybody. I kind of thought, oh my God, everybody just really hates the three of us. This is so horrible. And I learned pretty quickly to stop looking at those. But I didn't feel famous because for 4 years, I'd already been with Hef almost 24/7. Like I'd go out and run my errands during the day. And then I'd come back and we'd go out, you know, to nightclubs or restaurants and things, and everybody would freak out over him. So it always just kind of felt like it was still the same way. Like, oh, he's famous and we're just standing here. Like, yeah, maybe a few other people know our names, but I didn't feel famous at all when I was there.
When did you feel the shift? Like, when did you ever have a realization or a moment where you were like, okay, this is my life and like I am famous?
Yeah, it was when I left, because this was also, it was in 2008. So it was also like the height of like paparazzi in LA. And, you know, you couldn't really go anywhere without paparazzi being everywhere. And I remember I had put a down payment on an investment property, and I had planned on renting it out. But I broke up with Hef really suddenly, and I was like, oh shit, I actually have to move into that place. And I went there, and I just remember feeling so exposed, and there would be like a weird truck parked outside the condo, and it may have had nothing to do with me, but I just remember it felt like such a fish out of water moment, knowing that, oh, these people know who I am. And I got into a really bad relationship right after that, where the guy was basically dating me as a publicity thing, but I didn't know that. Like, it never would have occurred to me that anybody would want to date me for publicity, because I didn't think of myself as famous. I thought of myself as like, just like this accessory. So it was pretty jarring, and I moved to Las Vegas to do a show, and I felt a lot more comfortable there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What about Vegas made you feel more comfortable?
Vegas, even though most people just think of the Strip when they think of Vegas, it feels like a small town.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I moved there to do a show at one of the casinos, so I was living at a hotel, But it's still, I don't know how to explain it. It just feels like a small town. Like everybody who worked at the casino, I knew, and it just felt very safe. I felt safe being inside a hotel. I didn't feel exposed. It was a really good place for me to like transition into the real world, I think.
Back when you were at the house and like you were doing the show, were you pretty cut off from your family at that point?
I mean, there was definitely a distance. Like they were up in Oregon. They would come down to visit sometimes. Like once they even stayed at like a house across the street that Hef owned. Like he was always pretty welcoming to people's families. But I just never told them what was really going on. You know, I was just too embarrassed.
So they just thought you were in like this happy relationship?
Mm-hmm.
But what about when the show was out and like it was obviously they knew he had like multiple girlfriends, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, but I think even then, a lot of people still didn't believe it. A lot of people were like, oh, he's not really having sex with all. He's like 80. Yeah. He's not really. You know, people thought it was just all for show that were like, oh, yeah, we're his girlfriends. Like people didn't really believe it until people started talking about what went on in the bedroom.
Did you feel like, and maybe not in your family specifically, but like some of the other girls' families, I feel like many of the girls came from, I don't know, maybe lower income backgrounds.
Everybody did. Nobody with any financial options was living there as a girlfriend. Never that I knew of.
Yeah.
Ever. It was always people who were like new to LA, down on their luck, had nothing. Like it was always that. It was always, I would never have moved in if I hadn't been in a situation where I felt like, oh shit, I have no place to live tomorrow. Like I just wouldn't have been bold enough to make that jump.
Were there some people in the house whose families felt like they felt pressure from the family to maintain it because it was kind of like their ticket or they got opportunities as well?
I don't want to say who, but yeah, there was one girl whose mom was very into her being there. I think the mom wanted to be there. She would kind of joke about it like, oh, if Hef asked me to be a girlfriend.
I feel like we saw that on the show a bit
yeah.
too. Like strange competition between like that girl and her mom.
Yeah, like I don't think she was totally joking when she said that.
Yeah. Because I could imagine like the added pressure of like, oh, it's not even only if you want to be there. It's like, yeah, your family is.
Totally.
But you never felt that way.
No, not at all.
But again, it brings us back to the control aspect because if you have people who are down on their luck, then obviously there are real needs or reasons why they feel like they're stuck in that place and they can't leave.
I kind of felt like I would be worse off if I left because, like I said, I was trying to be smart and save as much money as I could, but it takes a long time, especially when you're expected to like buy a new outfit for we were going out so often. But it's like, okay, I could leave, but I haven't like got that bridge job yet. I haven't like figured out what that next thing is yet, which is also hard because you're not supposed to work. So I'm kind of like trying to sneak around that as much as I could during the day. But I felt like if I left, I would be in a similar financial situation, but it would be worse because I'd have this reputation, even though the show hadn't started, but still like people knew, or if somebody Googles you, they're going to know. Like it's okay, I have this reputation as this girl who's like dating a 75-year-old man. Like I knew I would be like saddled with that reputation for the rest of my life. So
do you feel saddled with that?
I mean, I feel like I'm pretty free from it now. I know there's a lot of people, like you always get like a dumb comment on almost everything I post. Like some dude will walk in and be like, bro, you won the lottery with a 90-year-old or something stupid like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't personally feel like that, but I felt like it for a really long time.
Such a cliche though. I'm like, of course the woman always gets saddled with that.
Like I remember after my book came out, one of Hef's sons called me famous for being a gold digger. And I'm like, okay, you can call me a gold digger, but why doesn't your dad get an equally bad name? Like he's the one who created that situation. He had multiple girlfriends living there.
We're all like in their early 20s.
Yeah, he started it. So I might have participated in it, but why is the person who's like the mastermind who started it, like they're great, you know, but the women are a problem.
I mean, that's just like a patriarchal issue, and which is exponentially like on steroids in entertainment specifically.
Totally.
Like I have some friends who have dated older guys, and it's just like, even if they're not famous, like I feel like women always get the short end of the stick.
Totally.
Okay, I really admire that you've been super open about cosmetic procedures, and I feel like, or I want to ask, like there was a pressure to look a certain way to please Hef. And I feel like in the early 2000s, there was like this Playboy look that
Yeah,
was
for
super,
sure.
super popular. Like bleach blonde hair, tan, fake breasts. Kind of became the cornerstone of the early 2000s beauty trends. Now, looking back where you are now, would you change anything if you could?
Sometimes I look back at pictures and there was an era where I chopped off all my hair and like I was doing the really thin eyebrows. Sometimes I look back on that stuff and cringe. But for me, it kind of worked out just because even before I knew who Hef was, you know, I knew the Playboy brand and the women who were famous from Playboy, and I loved their look and I wanted to look like that. So it wasn't like I was made to pursue a look that I didn't like. There was a lot of pressure for sure. I felt like I could never be thin enough. I definitely developed body dysmorphia over that.
Were eating disorders rampant in the house?
100%. Yeah, a lot of people were struggling with bulimia. A lot of people used laxatives, things like that.
Did you ever struggle with any of that stuff?
No, but I would do like extreme calorie counting, which is maybe like borderline ED. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like it's sad when you feel like you have to be next to death before you admit you have an eating disorder, which is what I just kind of said. I've suspected, like I've wondered, you know, some of my history. I'm like, was that really eating disorder?
Yeah,
you know, when you're counting every single calorie, maybe not, maybe not, but other people really struggled with it.
Also being in competition, like you said, it's not just like one person. You guys are like, he created this web of intricacies of like competing with one another.
Yeah, you always had to keep up for sure.
But in terms of like plastic surgery, and the pressure you felt, well, sorry, I want to rephrase that. What are your thoughts on like current plastic surgery trends? You know, we just like talked about a little bit about the early 2000s, and now it's like with the BBL and everyone getting their fat pads taken out.
You know what stumps me more about it than anything is where are people getting the money for this? Like all these really young people are getting so much work done, and I'm like, how?
I know, and it's called. You like look at there's this one YouTuber. Well, she'll make videos of like this is what these celebrities have done, and she'll do like a price list at the end. And it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It's crazy. Like I actually got my boobs done before I moved to the mansion, but it was like, you know, when you first start college and all the credit cards are sending you the here, take this. So you sign up for all the credit cards. It was like major like credit card debt.
Was spent on some of the plastic surgery
on my boobs,
stuff.
yeah.
Because then when you did your nose later on, Hef did. Okay, you did that when you were at the house. As a mother now, do you have hesitations? Like if your daughter were to come to you in the future and say like, I want plastic surgery?
It would depend what it is. Like I would counsel her to just be really conservative if she was really dead set on wanting something. I feel like I'm really happy with the choices I made. I feel like I didn't go overboard, and I still like the way I look at 45. And I just think it's always better to be conservative and not go crazy with like the fillers and the surgery, because you can always do more later, you know, if you don't think it's enough. So I would just counsel her. Like, I hope she feels like she doesn't want plastic surgery, because that would be nice. But you know, if she was really dead set on something when she's old enough to get it, I would just say, take your time, make the most informed decision, find the best doctor, don't go overboard.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between wanting something and feeling like you need it.
Totally.
And that's where you go down like the dysmorphic rabbit hole. And it seems like maybe some of these girls felt like, oh, if I'm going to be in the house, I need to be this way.
Oh, totally. I mean, that's where I got the idea to get my nose done, which I don't regret at all. Like I fucking love my nose. So I definitely don't regret it. And I remember like when I was a teenager thinking sometimes my nose looked bigger than I might like, but I never like fantasized about getting a nose job or had that on my list or anything. But when you're living at the mansion and everybody wants to be in the magazine and he's kind of always giving you little comments that make you think you're not pretty enough. And I'm always looking, I'm like, well, what about me is so different from like everybody else in the magazine? Oh, I know my nose needs to be smaller. Like I'm really lucky I didn't go crazier on the plastic surgery thing, because I was in that mindset.
Were there some girls who you felt like did go overboard?
I think so, in my opinion. I think, and you know, back then too, when people were getting their lips done, the technique wasn't as good as it is today. So it always looked really obvious. And I felt like there were some people there who maybe like aged themselves a lot by getting like a lot of filler and things like that.
Well, also just the beauty standards at the time. Like Heidi Montag is like a perfect example. She got a lot of work done and actually reversed a lot of it. Do you ever think back to that time like, I wonder, do you think of yourself as more of a victim of the time and the beauty standards and being in that house? Do you ever worry that like you perpetuated also a version of womanhood or beauty standards that were maybe unhealthy?
Well, I ended up working at the Playboy studio for 2 years before I left. I was the editor of the Playmate features. And when we were doing that, I was really big on doing as minimal retouching as we could. I didn't get my way on everything necessarily, but I felt like there was a healthier way to showcase it and include more diversity. Like I didn't make huge strides within those 2 years. There was definitely a narrow beauty standard, but I feel like I had my eyes open to it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like that's expanded now today?
For me personally, sure. And for the world, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, this next part is I wanted to talk a little bit more about the negative parts of your guys' relationship and then how I'm sure it's affected you as a person. You've described your relationship with Hef as Stockholm Syndrome. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on it?
I just had such an idealized version of him in my head. Like I knew enough about him from interacting with him at like the pool parties and things like that. I just thought he was like such a gentleman and all his friends loved him so much and he's so smart and so accomplished. So I had a lot of reasons to like him when I started dating him. And of course the relationship grew deeper and deeper. But I think when someone is trying to keep you really isolated too, that creates that kind of Stockholm Syndrome dynamic. So it was definitely, I wouldn't say the whole relationship was like Stockholm Syndrome, but it was definitely like laced with that for sure. Like I started to feel like he was the only person I could trust and the only person who I could kind of, you know, stand by, and everybody else is a problem.
Did you ever also feel like, oh, if I could just have him or if these other people would go away, like things would be okay?
100%. Like there would always be girls here and there that I would get along with and be friends with. And I loved having people around for the different social things, the other playmates and such. But I hated going into the bedroom with multiple people. And I hated that the relationship had to be multiple people. And I always thought if all the other girls were gone, everything would be great. Everything would be perfect. But toward the end, Bridget and Kendra were leaving and it was just going to be me and Hef. And he started to get really verbally abusive with me. And I don't know if that's just coincidence. I even look back, I've even recently just started to think this might be a possibility. I think it might have been early signs of dementia. I've been discussing that on the podcast a little bit, and people will write to me and say that some of the earliest signs of dementia is something happens somewhere in your brain. I'm not an expert on it. I can't tell you which part, but it makes people get really mean. Because he was getting really mean over random things. I was just like, I can't take this anymore. Like, I didn't know what was causing it. I just thought, you know, this is who he is.
Yeah. And did it feel like a stark contrast from who he was previously?
Not entirely, because we'd had some really rough patches in our early days. But as the show was happening and he was just happy with it being me and him. And of course, Bridget and Kendra were still there like as girlfriends, but there was no like group activities or anything happening after a certain point. I just felt like, oh, cool, this relationship is turning into what I've always wanted it to be. It's so great, blah, blah, blah. But then things just got really bad during the end. So I'm like, no, you know, that was just a good couple of years, you know.
How did it affect your mental health or your image of yourself and self-esteem?
I'm not even sure I fully understand that yet. I think I was like completely broken in a way when I left, and I was just on survival mode. I knew I needed to hit the ground running. I knew that I had somewhat of a platform because of the TV show. So I needed to find my next project and start working right away, which I did. But I couldn't even stop to really reflect until years later. And that's when I decided to write my book.
And do you do therapy, or like have you had...
Oh yeah, I've had therapy like off and on all through the years since I left. And yeah, now I'm not in regular therapy or anything, but...
So I would say that some of your critics out there or whatever would say, okay, so there are obviously people out there who look at your situation or really any relationship where there's a power imbalance between two people. And it seems that like the person, both people benefit in their own ways in the relationship. But when you come out and speak on like abuse that happened or things that were awful, when it's kind of no longer serving you or you're not in the relationship, I feel like people have said, like, why taint Hef's legacy when he's dead, you know?
Oh, my book came out. That is something people say to me a lot, but my book came out when he was still alive. So I know a lot of other people have come forward after, and there's no wrong time to come forward. It's when you feel like it's right for you. But that does annoy me when people say that, because I'm like, I said that when he was alive, and he put out a response.
Yeah. Or what about when they say, like, okay, you're benefiting from it, or you benefited from it and were there willingly, and then you also stand to profit, like, once you leave.
Yeah, I think people are looking at it negatively because it was a relationship. If I had had a job at a corporation and I had a terribly verbally abusive boss who made all kinds of unfair rules, and yeah, I'm sitting there collecting the salary because it's my fucking job, and you'd need to find another job before you quit it. You know what I mean? And also, like, the show Girls Next Door was a collaborative effort. Like, yeah, it would have never happened if it wasn't for Hef in the mansion, but you know, the show got canceled when they replaced the three of us. So the show wouldn't have lasted 5 seasons if the three of us hadn't resonated with the audience. So, you know, people that resent me for talking about the show on a rewatch podcast now, it's like, well, that was my thing too. It wasn't just his.
Also, it's your life.
Totally.
Like, those were years and years of your life. And obviously when you write a book, or now you've written 2 books, it's like you're going to write about your life. I think it's important that, like, yeah, people can come out and share their stories at any point.
Totally. Yeah, people just judge because it was a relationship. Like, if I was saying the same kind of things about a job I worked at, nobody would be like, well, you got paid, didn't you? People would be like, no, that company fucking sucks. I wouldn't want to work there. You know what I mean? But
yeah, I think people will be like, oh, don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah.
Or, like, after the fact. Yeah, I just wanted to address that because I also think it's good, like, in your own words to say, like, I don't know, people hide behind screens.
Totally.
And so for you to be like, well, actually, this is my take on it, or this is why I did the things I did. You talked about on your podcast, where you did one with Hef's son, that you had I'm going to butcher this word's pronunciation, fraternization rule.
Yeah.
Okay. For girlfriends at the mansion. And he said that was emotional abuse, his son.
Yeah, we were not supposed to fraternize with the butlers or any of the staff at all. And I think that insecurity came from the fact that a couple of Hef's previous girlfriends and romantic interests had affairs with either security guards or butlers and things like that. So I was always very distant and, like, respectful and professional with the staff. I know Bridget and Kendra were able to be more friendly with the staff and in a very appropriate way. I think that's great. But he would get really mad if he would find somebody, like, standing in the pantry talking. But, you know, I think it was hard for people because those were other people that were their same age, and they don't want to feel like they're living in a house and not talking to these people like they're human, you know?
Totally. Did you feel it was validating for Hef's son, now that he's an adult, to kind of agree with you or say things that felt like were in agreement with your views?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so impressed with how just intelligent and open-minded he is. You know, we're not going to agree on everything, but he's just so open-minded. And I think even, you know, probably still trying to understand his own relationship with his dad.
Yeah. I can imagine that to be difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think many people are fascinated to find out that, you know, a sexual pioneer of sorts, or someone who ran this huge magazine and had multiple girlfriends, that when you've talked about the actual sexuality or this intimacy, that it was very robotic and, like, kind of lacked sexual, or like,
yeah, I felt like the group sex was for sure. Like, I didn't have any problem, like, it being with him or anything like that. But I was very uncomfortable with the group dynamic. Nobody wanted to be there. Everybody just kind of, like, faked it around him. And it was just miserable. I hated it.
Do you feel like he shared parts of himself with you that were, like, real and loving, and, like, you felt like, even looking back on it now, knowing everything that you do, that you're like, okay, there were parts of it that were, like, real love?
You know, looking back, my opinion on it changes. I think when I first left, one of the final reasons why I left was because it really became clear to me that he had been pitting me and the girls against each other since I had moved in. And I felt so betrayed by that I kind of would look back on the relationship and just not believe anything he ever said to me, and just kind of categorize it all as bad. I mean, I think he loved me the best way he could. But my opinion's kind of always changing on it because I even read like Crystal Hefner's book and reading about her relationship with him through her eyes and comparing that with what I experienced. I'm like, no, I think we did have something kind of special from his end. Like, I don't think I was just there, you know? So
can you speak more to that? Because I feel like the media really pitted you and Crystal against each other.
yeah.
What was the experience of just even reading her book?
It made me feel all kinds of ways. Like I said, it kind of gave me a little bit of closure because it made me feel like his and my relationship was like more special just in comparison. I feel like, and I'm not judging, like it's fine, whatever, but I feel like her relationship was a lot more transactional with him. It was a lot more like, okay, I'm here to like take care of you for the end of your life. And everybody kind of knew what it was. I mean, I'm sure it's more complex than that. I'm just kind of boiling it down. But there's a lot of things I have questions about too in that book.
Have you spoken to her at all?
No. She was on the internet being mean to one of my friends and she has not apologized. And I'm a very loyal friend. So.
But you're obviously very close with Bridget.
Yeah, totally.
Because you guys do your
Mhm.
podcast too. How did you rebuild trust in relationships after leaving?
It was really hard. I went through a period where I would date people and they would want to be with me because of who I was. But then once we got in a deeper relationship, they'd get really jealous of my past or really judgmental or really awful that way. I'm still working on building trust, honestly. It's just
Yeah.
different with every person.
I've talked about this on my podcast with a bunch of different
Mhm.
people where like someone wants a woman because they're successful
Yeah.
or they have these accolades or they present themselves, they're confident, they're sexy. And then it's like once they're in the relationship with them, they like feel emasculated by a woman who has it all. And so they try to like break it down a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like that's kind of like something men grow up with like a male version of like, you know, we're raised with like a Disney fairy tale and we think it's supposed to be that way. And that's not always a realistic expectation. And that can lead to some toxicity. But I feel like men have like a different version of that where it's like, I can tame this really successful woman and she's just going to want to drop everything for me and what an ego boost that's going to be. I think somebody should look into that.
But it's also like, why, of all the reasons you fell in love or were initially attracted, why would you want to take those away?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense.
I think it's an ego boost of like, I'm the bigger, better prize. She used to have all that, but she's happier with me.
Yeah, or imagine like insecurity of people dating you being like, oh, well, I don't run this thing. I feel like I don't compare to someone like Hef. And so, but yeah, I think it comes out of insecurity.
Totally.
And yeah, I don't even know like how I talk about this with a lot of my girlfriends all the time, or I'll see someone who is like the brightest light in the room and then they get into a relationship with someone who really wants to dim their light.
Yeah.
It's like something you have
happens
to
a
be
lot.
like very cautious about.
Totally.
Obviously, this is a mental health podcast. I usually like to like go through a couple mental health questions. Are you familiar with attachment style?
Yes.
Do you know which one have you like looked into what you think yours is?
I'm naturally an anxious attachment style, but after the mansion, one of the gags on the show was I would always bug Hef about like wanting to get married and wanting to have kids, which I did do and we did talk about. We did try to have kids. We tried in vitro, but it didn't work. But it also was a gag on the show and I also thought it was funny and would lean into it. But it became such a thing where like people would hate on me over it and they'd categorize me as like a crazy girlfriend or like, so and that really affected me. So in relationships now, it's like, I don't make an effort really, or tell people how I feel. I'm trying to like get over that and like readjust. But I think I was so affected by people's judgment of how I came off on the show that I went totally the other way, where I'm the type of girl that like, he always has to reach out. He always has to text first. He always has to do this, and I'm trying to readjust and like go back toward the middle. But naturally, I'm an anxious attachment style, but I went totally the other way.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's almost traumatic for people who don't also really know you to be giving all of these opinions like online.
Yeah, it's really strange.
Can you talk to me about some of the complex feelings that you've like processed since leaving the mansion and like how you cope today, or do you just compartmentalize and you don't even really think about it anymore?
Today I don't think about it too much unless something's coming up like with the podcast or in an interview or something. In my day-to-day, I'm not thinking about like old stuff or Playboy stuff. I think writing the book was probably the most helpful thing, and that helped me like give a name to what I was going through.
What are some of your biggest lessons that you learned during that period that maybe are important to you as a mom now?
Oh, important to me as a mom? I don't know how it applies to me being a mom, but I just learned a lot about relationships and not jumping in too fast and, you know, looking out for love bomby type of behaviors, because it's so tempting because everybody, of course, wants to be treated well and everything, but you just shouldn't move into anything too fast and pace yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest one.
Well, I think a lot of people talk about like motherhood being like like you're almost like you have this child or children, you can almost like heal your inner child through, or like do things differently, or like lessons that you learned and the things you've been talking about in this interview, but like self-esteem and confidence, and like how can I not kind of also project those things onto my child?
Oh, for sure. Like their dad and I were really, really big on from the beginning raising both our kids, but especially our daughter, to be focused on what she loves doing and what she's passionate about, and not looks or clothes too much or trying to get validated through like a boy's attention. We're really conscientious about steering away from all that stuff. I'm not like a Barbie hater, but like she was one of the kids who wasn't allowed to have Barbies.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And do you feel like that's because you're, again, trying to do a little bit opposite because of some of your experiences?
I think their dad was a little bit alarmed by like body image issues with the Barbies, because they hadn't started doing like the different shapes when I first had my daughter. Like I think things are different now. I would get her Barbies, actually, I correct that. I would get her the Barbies that were like career oriented, because she was always really into animals. So if there was like a beekeeper Barbie, she could have that one, or she could have a veterinarian Barbie.
What do you look for now in healthy relationships? Or like what's your relationship? Like if you were to put out a list of criteria.
For me personally, communication is really important. Somebody who lets me have my space. My kids are my number one priority, so it can't be anybody who bugs me at all. I mean, I haven't had that experience, but it could never be anybody who would bug me at all about like making my kids a priority or spending too much time with my kids or anything. It just really has to be somebody who gives me space, because I think so many of the toxic relationships I was in the past were super controlling people who wanted to dominate my every move and know what I was doing and be in the house and do this. So it definitely has to be somebody who gives me a lot of space.
And you're not with the father of your children, or you are?
No.
Okay, no. What, are you dating right now, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I've had the same boyfriend for the last 5 years.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Oh,
and he gives me plenty of space.
Would you be open to having more children?
I'm 45. I think I might be like past that.
I don't know.
You know what? I always wanted 3 kids, but things just got really hectic and are still really hectic. I like the idea of having another kid. I don't know if it's practical though.
Yeah. I'm also like looking at you. You look like you're in your 20s.
You're so sweet. Thank you.
I also have to just say this briefly, but I watched this YouTube video you did years ago of like how you did your makeup back in the Playboy Mansion, and I use Cinema Secrets now because of you.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
I love Cinema Secrets.
Yeah,
it's
I know.
So
I
good.
saw that and I was like, wait, I'm obsessed. And it's so cheap and it's so good.
Yeah,
And I'm
love
like
it.
obsessed with it. I just, that's so
Such a great texture.
Yeah, it's not like doesn't go along with some of these questions, but I just had to put that out there.
Thank you.
Do you ever struggle with like rectifying how the Playboy brand or Hef, you know, in certain ways it has had its accolades, like for free speech, for pioneering kind of sexual freedom and liberation, and some types of female empowerment, with having such a different identity that you experience kind of behind the scenes?
I mean, I definitely don't believe in like throwing the baby out with the bathwater at all. Like, I loved the Playboy brand. I loved the pictorials. I wouldn't have worked at the studio for 2 years if I didn't think that was a positive experience. So I don't hate on the brand necessarily. And I know Hef did a lot of good things in his life as far as like fighting for rights. And, you know, he had a lot of great qualities. I wouldn't have been with him for as long as I was if he didn't. But when I tell my story, it's just about me, I think. And I know that there's consequences with that and that other people get dragged into it because other people were key players in my story. But when I tell my story, it's supposed to be just about me. Like I understand it's like an inextricable thing. Like it's, if I'm saying something happened to me and it wasn't positive, you know, that is saying something negative about somebody else. But I just got to the point where I couldn't like lie about it and gloss over the relationship anymore.
Well, there's nuance in life.
Totally.
Nothing is black and white.
I'm really big on that and how two things can be true at the same time. And
I think that's hard for a lot of people to remember.
100%. I like to think that as a society, we're kind of moving into more of that thinking, but I think it's really hard for a lot of people now.
So can you tell me about your new show that's coming out in a couple days, Lethally Blonde? It's
called Lethally Blonde. It's a true crime show. There's 6 episodes in the first season. They're all incredibly different cases, but they all deal with someone, whether it might be the victim, it might be the perpetrator, who's involved in some kind of a sex work or entertainment industry type job. That's a really intriguing world. You know, people are so intrigued by these types of things, but I like to find, especially if it's the victim, and I like to find out more about them and paint a picture of who they were as a person and not just OnlyFans model or Playmate, you know, and tell their story more like that. So I really enjoy the kind of storytelling that ID does, and we really love getting into those stories. I started with the Playboy murders for 2 seasons. That was the first show I did with them. So Lethally Blonde is kind of an extension of that, but it's not Playboy specific.
And why is it important to highlight these types of stories?
Well, I was intrigued by the show. When I first got the offer from my agent, he's like, oh, it's called the Playboy murders. I'm like, I don't want to do it. There's too many Playboy things in my life already. He goes, okay, I'm going to send over the deck and just tell me what you think. And the cases they wanted to cover were so interesting to me. You know, I thought I knew everything about anybody who'd ever been in Playboy, and I hadn't heard some of these stories. So many of them were unsolved. I thought they were really important to tell. And most importantly, I thought this is a show I would watch and enjoy watching. So we had a great experience doing those first 2 seasons, and I'm excited about this new one.
Did it kind of freak you out a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, some of the cases involved people I had met. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, there was a case last season. It was the season finale. It was a woman named Jill Ann Spalding. And when Bridget and I were starting our podcast 1.5 years ago, we were going back and looking at some things that women who had been involved in that world the same time we were had written. And she had written a self-published book. And I was like, I wonder whatever happened to Jill Ann. So I looked her up and I found out she was killed in a double murder and suicide by her ex-husband. And I was just shocked by that and, you know, wanted to learn more about it. I couldn't believe I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like in that world, I see it all the time with like OnlyFans, porn. Like I know a lot of people who are in adult entertainment, like porn stars. And there's a lot of stuff that I think like festers in those environments because they're still in like the average person's view pretty taboo.
Yeah, everything does get heightened in those situations for sure.
When it's like behind closed doors a bit.
Yeah, and when you're in industries where there's a lot to gain by being a certain way and it involves sexuality and by in effect your love life and people get jealous and it's a very heightened situation for sure.
What is your view on like OnlyFans?
I was on OnlyFans for a while. It was non-nude. It was just like bikini and lingerie photos. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it. I just think if people need to be aware, you know, they put a watermark on all the content you put on OnlyFans, but that's not going to stop anybody from leaking it. And nobody's going to want to spend all the money to get it all taken down off the internet. So just know before you do it, anything you put out there, even if it's sent to somebody privately in a DM and they're paying for it, it has to be something that you're not going to die if it gets leaked. You know what I mean? Like you got to be okay with that. And sometimes, and I know a lot of girls like hire people to do this for them, communicate with the people in the DMs. But a lot of the DMs, like sometimes I'd go in and check in and I don't know, there are always people trying to get you to do more things. And it was just kind of like a ick feeling for me.
Did it feel like demeaning at all?
Yeah, it can. So I think you have to have like a strong separation of life and work, especially since it's kind of like you have these DMs rolling in all the time. So women who take OnlyFans really seriously, they feel like they're on call all the time. So I think establishing some really healthy like life work balance and trying to distance yourself a little bit, maybe set aside only a few hours for it, just set really strong boundaries, know that anything you send out, you know, could end up on the internet for everybody to see. I just think it's something to be really careful about and just, you know, take time for your mental health. And
yeah. Do you feel confident or like good about, I don't know, you have obviously like old Playboy nude stuff that's out there from back when you were at the mansion. Like, you feel good about that stuff always?
I mean, there's not anything I can do about it. Like, as far as posing for Playboy, like I always wanted to be in Playboy and I thought the photos were really beautiful. So that never bothered me at all. The one thing that bothered me is when we started filming Girls Next Door, you know, they would film us like shooting our pictorials. And sometimes we would think it would be funny to like, you know, go skinny dipping or something like that. But we thought, oh, it's going to be on E. They have to blur everything. Nobody's going to see everything. And we didn't know that it was going to be put on the DVDs unblurred and that it was going to be in foreign countries unblurred. So I wish somebody would have informed us of that, because I think we all would have been a lot more careful. Yeah. So that's kind of like an eye roll, but it's not the biggest deal because we got a lot of good things out of the show as well. I would just like to see, you know, change in the industry moving forward for anybody else who's getting into any kind of TV. I feel like what's going to be done with any nudity that's caught on camera needs to be fully disclosed before they sign that first release.
100%, because it's also not like, it's different than like if you were being nude on OnlyFans or doing like a pornographic video or something like that you are like consenting to, and this sounds like a little bit different.
Yeah, like we knew we were in front of the cameras naked, obviously, but like the cameramen were totally professional. Everybody at the mansion was totally professional. I just think we would have been more careful had we known, and we would have maybe like covered up a little bit more or just not been as out there.
How has been just like getting older been?
Not bad. It's
I mean,
like it's like I can't.
You look fucking iconic. So it's not even about what you look like, but I think the early 2000s were such a specific pivotal time where there was so much attention on how you looked, and like you were like one of the most iconic people of like setting those trends and those standards. And so I just wonder, like, I don't know, as you enter new phases and like you're a mom now, and yeah, like how
I feel like life just keeps getting better. So I like getting older. Like every year I get a bigger number and I'm kind of reminded that like I'm supposed to be 45 and okay. You know? Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of people, and specifically entertainment, that's like really hard for a lot of women.
Oh, 100%. I think
it's the pressures.
Yeah, I think it's definitely really scary for sure.
And also, like, are the opportunities that are rolling in, will they continue to roll in forever?
Yeah, totally.
And like as we become, I asked this to a friend of mine who is a porn star, and she looks pretty young. Of like, yeah, as you get older and you're kind of, how did I put it? Like your social standing, especially in porn, obviously, like diminishes a bit as you get older, or like all of these people online who are fans of her because of what she looks like, and as you naturally just change and don't look like you did when you were 20 or something, like how that affects your self-esteem or confidence, and as a woman, how do you like navigate that?
Yeah, I think I was more worried about aging when I was in my 20s. Because I really wanted to have kids and I didn't want to miss out on that opportunity. But I think I'm just delusional and think that I'm just going to like keep getting hotter and keep getting better. I'm seriously delusional. Like aging really doesn't bother me. Like trolls online try to like make it a thing sometimes, but.
Wait, I love that answer. I don't think that's delusional. I think women are like in their prime as they like enter like literally they're like 50s.
Me too.
Because also you just have so much more knowledge, and I think that inherent confidence that just like comes out where you're like, I don't know, if you were sitting here right now with your 21-year-old self, it's like you're like a naive baby.
Totally. I feel like I was still just trying to figure out how to like operate in the world. Like I'd been dumped here from another planet at 21. Like.
And just like also the ambition or the advocacy for yourself is really fucking sexy. What's next for you? I mean, you have the show that's coming out. Are there any other things in the works that you're excited about?
I'm just hoping for more of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any advice to like a young woman who is listening today and looks up to you of, I don't know, something you've learned in life that you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I would say don't make fear-based decisions and keep your friends really close. Just keep like a good, solid core community around you. Even if you're like new to a new city, like keep in touch with your friends over social media and things like that. I just think it's really important to always keep communication with your friends. I think one of the reasons I felt so isolated in my early days at the mansion was I felt so embarrassed of what was going on. I didn't really want to tell anybody, you know?
Mm-hmm. Which again is like probably, I feel like, why people who do have that control mentality like someone who's very young and impressionable.
100%.
Because they don't know better yet.
Yeah, totally.
And random, but you're like really into Disney, right?
Yeah, I am.
When did that start?
Oh, when I was like out the womb.
Yeah.
Like, I was just like raised on Disney stuff, and my family and I would vacation in Disneyland every so often, and it was always the place where everybody was the most happy. And even if there was drama, like there was no drama when we were on our vacation. So I'm literally hardwired to like be happy in Disneyland.
And how often do you go? Or you still go all the time?
Yeah. I go a lot. I go probably on average like once a month.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I take my kids.
I just went for the first time. Well, I went one time when I was 5 years old, have zero memory of it. And I went last month actually as an adult, and it was fucking beautiful.
Did you go to Disney World or Disneyland?
I went to Disneyland and California Adventure, and I don't know, just there was something about even riding some of the rides where I was like, where this beauty is missing. Like the old Snow White and like Peter Pan, and I'm just like, there was something so like fresh and innocent.
Totally. I love that. I love a theme. I love an environment. I just love that. Like I have another friend who's super into Disney, and we just go and like shop and eat on some days, you know?
And yeah, what specifically about it is so like interesting for you? Is it like, for me, I felt very drawn to the innocence, and I'm like, oh, when I watch even children's movies today, they just don't have that spark that they used to have. Like everything just was so just like beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's literally like being hardwired from a young age to be like happy there. But also, like, I really love art direction. I love anything aesthetic. So just those kind of like themed lands and all the attention to detail is really appealing to me. And I also love intricate storytelling, and they love to put like a big story behind everything and like little Easter eggs and stuff like that. Somebody was talking about how like why are like so many Disney adults like Taylor Swift fans, but I think that it's similar things. Like there's an aesthetic when you look at like her Eras Tour costumes. There's all the storytelling in her songs. There's all the Easter eggs. Like it's a lot of the similar themes.
Do you consider yourself a Disney adult?
I'm like the original Disney adult.
Oh. Do you collect like a bunch of the ears and stuff?
I have some ears. I'm not really like a big ear person.
Yeah. And do you like, is your home and like interior design and stuff, like do you like set like an element of kitschiness? And
oh no, totally. Like my house in Beechwood in LA, it's like one of the original houses there. It was built in 1926, and it was like a storybook style. So everybody either calls it like the witch house or the Snow White house. Like it looks like a little cottage with towers and stuff. Yeah.
And so it seems like it like ended up in the perfect hands.
Yeah. And when I was married, my husband's in my house in Las Vegas, which he still has, and I spend a lot of time there with the kids. We had an Imagineer from Disney decorate it. So there's like hidden themes throughout the house. Yeah.
Wait, that's amazing.
Yeah, like the living room was like 2 stories tall. So I had it turned into like a Beauty and the Beast library. And
cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So it seems like there's always been an element of creativity in your life for like liking these things that out of the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have my special interests for sure.
Yeah, and like fantasy.
Yeah.
Where can my listeners find you?
On Girls Next Level podcast, anywhere you find podcasts, there's a new one every Monday. And Lethally Blonde premieres on March 25th on ID, and then it streams on Max.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was so nice to meet you. You are amazing.